We have won on the science argument, hand down. They won't even discuss it anymore. We talked about that in the last interview, about how we tried to set up these very legitimate, very well-controlled, very structured debates, and the pro-vaccine people just won't even show up at the table. They won't even show up. They won't even come there. And to me, if you're so convicted that you are so right, wouldn't you just love the opportunity publicly to take somebody like Sherri Tenpenny and Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy and Tony Bark and Bob Sears and all of us that know the science on our side? Wouldn't you just love the opportunity to publicly put your boot on the heel of their neck and crush them once and for all? But instead, because you have nothing to stand on, and we blow holes in every single argument you have, you won't even show up at the debate table. What does that tell you?
FC2O. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. Here we go. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. FC2O.
Welcome to FC2O. Today we welcome the controversial Dr. Sherri Tenpenny back into the fray. Why is she controversial? Because she literally goes counter to the mainstream narrative or conversation. But this is with good reason. She has identified and collated over 10,000 research papers which question the safety, effectiveness or efficacy of vaccination. In today's follow-up Q&A episode, we actually pose quite a range of questions from genuine inquiries of concern to more vicious or loaded questions from skeptics of Sherri's work. If you're not sure where you stand in this debate, or even if you think you are sure, you may find some of Sherri's answers insightful and at times surprising, and they will hopefully help you towards a broader view of the topic. Enjoy the show. Here we go. So, welcome to another episode of FC2O with me, Matt Wallden, and my returning guest today, Sherri Tenpenny. So, thank you very much for coming back, Sherri.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back, Matt.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. We got a really good response to the initial episode that we put out. Lots of people really grateful for the information you provided. Of course, one or two people perturbed by it. And one of the things we didn't quite get to in the last session was to get to some of the questions I had already submitted. And then, of course, following that episode, I've had some more questions submitted. So today is essentially a question round, and we're going to try and get through each question in 3 minutes, is what we agreed to before. I don't know how you feel about that now, but what do you reckon? Think we can do it?
Well, we're going to give it our college best, right?
Excellent. Excellent. Here we go.
Because honestly, as you know, this is a very big topic and it could go on literally for days. Yeah. I used to teach a 2-day, 16-hour course on this topic. So I'll do my very best to keep the answers short and tight.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into it. I've got a couple of additional questions for you at the end, or comments as well. So I'm going to hit start on my timer, and we'll see if we can actually do this to the 3 minutes or less, okay? So the first question is, do vaccines for infections differ to vaccines for diseases? I'm not sure if that's a good question or not. What do you think?
Well, I have to ponder that a bit, because there are vaccines for diseases, and I would say that there's a whole developing area of vaccinology that has to do with cancer vaccines. I mean, actual therapeutic cancer vaccines, where they take a small amount of the tumor. Let's say it's a kidney tumor. They take a small amount of the tumor. They develop antibodies against those tumor cells, and then they attach a small molecule of chemotherapy to the long arm end of the antibody. They inject it, and then it acts ostensibly like a laser-guided missile, that they're trying to take that antibody to address it directly to the tumor cell and deliver that piece of chemotherapy directly into into that cancer. So it's been a
Right.
long time in evolution. They really haven't perfected it yet. There's a lot of experimentation going on in the animal world. I do believe that if they could perfect that, I think it would be a very good thing to do, because you wouldn't end up with the systemic toxicity of the chemotherapy. You would be delivering the chemotherapeutic drug directly to the tumor. So that would be, I believe that would be a good thing. Now, that's a completely different thing than injecting foreign matter to develop an antibody against a pathogen that just might arrive in your bloodstream and isn't even there.
Yeah, right,
So
right.
I think that there are two completely different types of arms of vaccinology.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. And so where does HPV stand in that discussion? Is
Well,
is that what you just described, or is that something different?
that's completely different.
Yeah.
HPV is the injection of viral-like particles
Mm,
that aren't even the real HPV vaccine, because the human papilloma virus is very difficult to grow in culture. So, and they
right.
spent years trying to do that. And so instead, they made a surrogate virus called viral-like particles, and they
Hmm.
inject these viral-like particles to develop antibodies to eliminate a virus that may or may not be there. So
Right.
it's a completely different discussion. It is not a therapeutic vaccine. It is supposedly a preventative vaccine that doesn't work very well and has a huge amount of side effects, a lot of deaths in both girls and boys.
Right. Excellent. We did that in 2 minutes, 2 minutes 40. That's
Woohoo!
that's amazing. Very good. Very good. All right. So we're going to go on to question 2, and I even kind of snuck in a second question there as well. So that was great. Okay. So question 2 is: I would like to know Sherri's view on the vaccination of pregnant mothers and the risks to the fetus across the placenta, and at what stage the greatest risk would be.
Well, it's interesting because as of right now, there are, let me see, the vaccines that they give to pregnant women are influenza, pertussis. In second and third world countries, they give tetanus. And
Hmm.
then if you're Rh negative, they give something called RhoGAM.
Right.
And they
Right.
usually give that somewhere between 28 weeks and the time, and a second shot at the time of birth. Now, interestingly, as I do an entire course on this inside of VaccineU, so if
Mm.
people really want to drill deeper than our 3-minute answer here, they can go to VaccineU.com, look at pregnancy course, and under the pregnancy course, we talk about vaccines in pregnancy. And I'll just
Excellent.
very briefly talk about, just say that the pertussis vaccine that they started giving to pregnant women back in about 2007 is when they started looking at the research at giving it to them. There's never been any studies that have been done. There's been no research. They said that there were no animal studies. They just started doing it empirically to see what would happen. And
Mm.
they had no idea what was going to happen to the fetus. They really don't know if the stuff that's inside those vaccine crosses the placental barrier, or what the outcome could be. Now,
Mm.
10 years later, one of the things they are saying is that by exposing the fetus to pertussis prior to birth, creates a kind of a pseudo antibody, which makes them not be able to develop their real antibodies when they get pertussis vaccines at 2, 4, and 6 months. And
Right.
we've seen that, we've known that for years in the animal world, that it, because of the antibodies that pass through the mother's milk to their little baby dogs and cats, that when they give them their vaccines, they really don't develop very much of a robust response because of the blocking effects of the antibodies that come through, natural antibodies that come through the mother's milk. So
Mm.
we're messing with Mother Nature. We don't know what we're doing. I was in a seminar in 2004 when they first started talking about pregnancy vaccines, and this was a CDC seminar in Washington D.C. And I
Hmm.
distinctly remember the people sitting on the stage saying, "We will never get OB-GYNs to go along with this, like never." I mean, they won't even give their pregnant women an antihistamine, or they don't even want them to take vitamins other than these crappy little prenatals. And
Mm.
so we will never get them to go along with it, with giving flu shots and pertussis shots to their pregnant women. Well, as soon as the OB-GYNs just rolled over, just started doing it. Yep, no problem. We'll just give it, with no
Wow.
science, no evidence base, nothing behind it. And we drill deep into that. In fact, it's a 2-part course, there's 2 modules in that course. If you go to vaccineu.com and look at pregnancy course, and you find the ones on vaccinating pregnant women. In that module, there's also RhoGAM, hepatitis B at birth, the pregnancy shots for women, and over the next couple of months, there will also be modules on circumcision, on Group B strep, on antibiotics in the eyes, and a couple of other things that, pregnancy and ultrasounds. So you can find all that information at VaccineU.com.
Perfect. And you just went slightly over there, but I think we because we were under on the last one, then we get away with it. So that's brilliant. Right. Excellent. So plenty of additional information that's available from VaccineU. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So on to number 3. Is vaccination contributing to the increased allergies and autoimmune diseases we now see?
Well, there's no doubt about that, and it's just not my opinion. In fact, there was an article that was published in January of 2014 in the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Vaccine Research that actually said almost all the vaccine components can trigger an IgE allergic response, particularly proteins from eggs and flu shots, gelatin, for which is in many, particularly gelatin is in MMR, chickenpox, the shingles vaccine, and several of the DPT vaccines, and yeast, which is in Gardasil and hepatitis B. Neomycin, thimerosal, and aluminum, which are in many of the vaccines, are also published in the medical literature to show allergies. So the components such as antibiotics, neomycin, polymyxin B, amphotericin B, preservatives such as thimerosal, 2-phenoxyethanol, and benzethonium chloride, stabilizers such as gelatin, amino acids, several of the amino acids, polysorbate 80, all of those, and this is from a mainstream medical journal, Matt, where it's this medical journal, and I'm reading right off of a table that was right inside that article of vaccine. It's I'll say it again. It's published in January 2014, the Journal of Clinical Experimental Vaccine Research. The title of the article is Vaccine Allergies.
Right. Okay, excellent.
So this is from mainstream peer-reviewed medical journals saying that vaccines do, not can, but do contribute to allergies and autoimmune diseases.
Okay, excellent. And I know last time we mentioned that there could be other things as well, such as glyphosate and other environmental influences outside of vaccines. Is there anything else that you've been able to sort of put your finger on aside from vaccines that may be driving the autoimmunity sort of crisis that we're seeing?
Well, I think the primary thing is aluminum. I mean, it really is aluminum. I mean, there is so much published research on problems associated with aluminum. In fact, one of the articles I was looking at yesterday, because I just put together a 2-hour presentation for the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association annual meeting for next year, and looking through the information on aluminum, I mean, there were several articles that actually say in the conclusions of the articles, we really must no longer use these in vaccines. We've got to come up with something different, because children, by the time they're 5 years of age, will have almost 5,000 micrograms of aluminum injected in. And if they're fully vaccinated by 18 years of age, they will have almost 12,000 micrograms of aluminum injected into their bodies. Now, the aluminum doesn't go away. There's a very big difference between injected and ingested. The injected aluminum gets picked up by the macrophages, by white blood cells, circulates and gets deposited in various organ systems, and can cross the blood-brain barrier and be deposited permanently into the brain.
Yeah. I know. I've looked into that since you told me last time. Oh, there's our timer.
Yay! I got it in.
That's perfect. You got it just in time. That's perfect. But I've looked into that since we last spoke, and it's quite shocking actually. It's it's like you say, there's many studies that talk about the aluminum and its effects on brain function and its increased levels in kids on the autistic spectrum and so on. And it's quite clear it's not just as you say, conspiratology.com that's got that kind of information on it.
Well, and I'll just put another little plug here for if people really want to take deep dives into these vaccine additives and adjuvants. Again, it's a 7-module course inside of VaccineU.com. But if you go to VaccineU, there's a 7-module course that includes adjuvants. There's a full hour course on aluminum, it's a module, full hour module module on aluminum, one on mercury, 2 different modules on chemicals, and 2 different modules on the cell lines. One is on viral contaminants, and the other is on the cells, like animal cells, cells from aborted fetal tissue, and things like that, that are used inside of vaccines. And we actually offer, if you get all 7 of them together, we actually offer that as a grouped discount. So people can explore that by going to VaccineU.com.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, good. So next question is from, I know this guy's an osteopath, and he says he's been seeing a lot of babies have big reactions to the new rotavirus oral vaccine, lots of diarrhea and reflux. He was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, a couple of things. Now, I'm not sure, there is a difference in the vaccines that are approved in the U.S. schedule versus some of the vaccines that are approved internationally. And, that's always a conundrum for me, because why would they approve a certain vaccine to be used in Europe, but the FDA would not approve it for use here? What's that all about? So, it seems as though if it's good for European kids or Asian kids, it should be okay for American kids, but the FDA refuses to approve it. And I do believe some of it is in the opposite direction. I do believe there are some vaccines that are approved by the FDA that aren't approved, for, say, in France. So I don't quite understand what that's all about, considering the fact that human genetics and family history are the only 2 areas in all of medicine that are not taken into consideration when you vaccinate. So my comments in response to your colleague there would be, I can only make a comment based on the 2 vaccines that I know are approved for use here in the US. And it might be a little different if for something in the UK. So there's 2 vaccines, 2 rotavirus vaccines approved in the US, Rotatech and Rotarix. And something I'll just put in a little thing here is that the Rotarix, any vaccine that you see that ends in the name RIX, that's a trademark from GlaxoSmithKline. And as a general rule, those vaccines are more toxic, have more toxic ingredients, have more ingredients overall than a vaccine that is not made by GlaxoSmithKline. So I frequently advise patients or people that are going to get vaccinated anyways, or can't not avoid vaccines because of court cases or military or things like that, or their job requirements, to please try to avoid vaccines that end in the name, the brand name ends in RIX. So the rotavirus vaccines here in the US, the Rotatech has polysorbate 80 in it, has cell culture medium, and it has fetal bovine serum in it. I think that would cause a little reflux and some problems in babies. The Rotarix has a long list of amino acids, several different conglomerate of cell culture mediums called modified Eagles medium. It has iron in it. It has magnesium sulfite. It has phenol red, sorbitol, and various other preservative ingredients. It also has latex in the tip. And so, and when you read the actual side effects of the rotavirus vaccine, it's the exact same thing as if you got a rotavirus infection. The rotavirus vaccine is completely unnecessary. It should have never been introduced into first world societies, because children almost all children by 2 or 3 years of age had been exposed to the rotavirus and had a little bit of diarrhea and had a lifetime of immunity. The only place that I felt that a rotavirus vaccine, and because it's an oral drop, may have had some value, may have been in third world countries that where these children would get this profound diarrhea from actually having a rotavirus infection and did not have access to first world medical care for rehydration. Because when children get rotavirus, if they die from it, it's because of dehydration. And, in the UK, in America, and Canada, and different places, all these children have access to going to a hospital or an urgent care. They have access to Pedialyte. They have access to oral hydration standards. They have access to ice cubes that, in the middle of the South Sahara, they may not, in terms of rehydration. So if there was something, if there was any value to it, it would be in those types of places that did not have access to medical care for rehydration. It has no business being in the vaccine schedule in first world countries.
Okay, excellent. Oh, look, the timer just went off. timer just went off right at that moment. So you actually got an extra minute or so there because I forgot to start the timer that time.
Well, I think we're doing good, and I think it's important to get
good.
some of this stuff out for people, I think.
Definitely, I agree. Now there was you know, when you're talking about different vaccines in different countries being approved, there was something that I know Andrew Wakefield was talking about on the Vaxxed documentary, where he was talking about one of the vaccinations that had been approved in Canada and ended up being linked with increased incidence of meningitis. So the name was changed and it was released in the UK, and sure enough, exactly the same thing happened under this different trade name. Yeah, I know. Who'd have thought that kind of thing could happen? Eh? And then the next thing was that, of course, having it been banned in those two countries, it was then released in Brazil, and there was a whole raft of deaths from meningitis there. So it does strike me that, you know, I'm not implying that necessarily the rotavirus situation is the same, but there definitely seems to be some degree of game playing of, you know, pushing it where it will be accepted and retracting it where it's not accepted, and you know, gradually working around the geography of the world to make sure you get your money's worth. But
can you think of any industry who does this sort of nonsense? You know, if you had a light bulb that every time you turned it on, it exploded, and it was called light bulb A, and you just took the label off of it and called it light bulb B and sent it to someplace else, do you think that would change the fact that when you turned it on, it exploded? I mean, like, how silly is that? Can you think of any other industry, automotive, manufacturing, anything else that you could possibly think of where these shenanigans go on?
Yeah, no, not at all.
And we're talking about the lives of human beings here and the lives of animals. We're talking about the lives of babies, adults, animals, and they do these kinds of things for commerce.
Yeah.
Just for money.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. Okay, next question. It's saying that you are a strong proponent of homeopathy. I think that's because you mentioned it, so I'm not sure how strong a proponent you are, but obviously you use homeopathy. And it made me wonder how much you rely on evidence to inform your practice. In your own practice, do your observations have greater impact than the literature?
In a lot of ways, that it does. I mean, you know, when you look at the published medical literature, you really have to dig deep to know who funded it and what the biases were. If you read the conclusion of the study, if you read the whole study and read the conclusion, I would say that 7 or 8 times out of 10, when you go back and read the abstract at the top, you would say, how in the conclusion of the abstract, you would say, how in the world did they come up with that conclusion based on what all of the data is inside of this study? And so, sometimes I think that you as a physician, you need to pay attention to the person sitting in front of you. I mean, how many times have patients come in to see you, Matt, or any of your colleagues, and they said, I've been to 7 different physicians or 7 different chiropractors, and nobody will listen to me. So now are you going to say, well, excuse me, your story does not coincide with the mainstream medical journal, so I just think you're crazy? Or do you listen to the patient and really try to figure out what they're trying to say and to help them? I mean, I think it's kind of a silly question. I mean, homeopathy has been around for more than 100 years, has all kinds of scientific evidence to prove it. I mean, it came out of the UK, you know, in terms of all of the main primary places to study homeopathy these days are in India and in the UK. And in India, they have entire hospitals, entire big hospitals where they just use homeopathy. And so I think that that's kind of a silly question. And I think that homeopathy has great value. I think it's like a lot of different types of things. There's a time to use it and there's a time to use something else. And I believe it's in the right hands, using it appropriately, it is very effective.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, I've had very positive effects with homeopathy myself, and you know, I've studied it a little bit, but not as in as much depth as many people. But yeah, I'm certainly open-minded to its benefits. One of my own experiences was actually with a wrist fracture, and I'd taken various painkillers to try and ease the pain in that first 24 hours after I've broken my scaphoid into 4 pieces, and it was fairly kind of nauseating, the pain, and you know, I took quite a powerful painkiller, Voltarol painkiller, and it did nothing. And then I started getting stomach pain because of it. So my stomach was getting quite upset. And then, you know, about 20 minutes after the stomach pain came on, so this is probably about 45 minutes after the actual that had taken the pills, I decided to try some homeopathy, and it was like an instantaneous. The pain just dropped completely, and it really made me think, if that was a placebo effect, you would surely expect there to be a stronger placebo effect with an evidence-based, in inverted commas, pharmaceutical than you would do with a less evidence-based, in inverted commas, homeopathic. So I know a lot of people say, oh, it's placebo, but this was an instant, like a vibrational, instantaneous. Oh, there's the timer. So anyway, that's just a personal
And
experience.
I
But
do think that it bears making a comment here about the whole concept of placebo. Because it has been the concept of placebo has been completely distorted to mean that if we give you a sugar pill and you get better, then you were just crazy to begin with. You really didn't have to, and
yes,
you were
yeah.
just looking for secondary gain and all these other things. Instead of understanding that if you gave someone a placebo, a sugar pill, and they got better, the power of the mind and the power of the mind to heal, and that the belief system that this is going to make me better, how powerful is that cognition that of what your mind can do to heal you? And so instead,
Yeah.
we've distorted that and made it be into something disparaging. And so and so I think that that's really an important concept. Maybe we can talk about that again sometime later. The other thing is when you
Yeah.
look at a clinical trial on, say, I don't know, just a blood pressure medication. And it's the outcome says that it was 83% effective to lower blood pressure. The real science is in the 17% for that it didn't work for. Why didn't it work for them? What about their genetics? What about their epigenetics? What is it about their mind, their mental belief systems? What is it? Why didn't it work there? That is really where the real science in terms of investigation should lie. But that data is just thrown underneath the bus and nobody pays attention to it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So point 6. One specific question is to ask why the rates of autism are similar for vaccinated and unvaccinated children.
I mean,
I don't know.
completely nonsense. I mean, first of all, there's no accumulative stats on unvaccinated kids and the rate of autism. And if there would be, it would be pretty close to zero. I mean, these children not only are not autistic, they don't have they are never on an antibiotic. They're not on daily prescription medications. They're not in special education courses. They don't require any special services from the government in terms of OT, PT, speech therapy, food therapy, sensory integration. You don't see unvaccinated kids in that population. And depending on where you read and what you look at, the incidence rate of autism in various pockets here in the US is 1 in 24 children. The average is about 1 in 69. Yeah. And so for someone to even make that question means that they know not a thing about what they're talking about.
Okay. I think they had a study that they were pointing to, which was from JAMA, and it has studied autism by MMR, autism occurrence by MMR vaccine status among US children with older siblings with and without autism. And essentially what they were looking, or what the conclusion was that these were privately insured children with older siblings. Receipt of the MMR was not associated with increased risk of ASD, regardless of whether the older siblings had ASD.
That has nothing to do with the question they asked.
Go on, explain further.
Well, first of all, they're looking at one isolated vaccine, which was MMR. They're looking to see whether or not if a family has a child with autism versus a family, comparing families. So that is not looking at the rate of autism among vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. So if that's the study they submitted to you, that what they're looking at has nothing to do with the question they asked.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, yeah. Good point. I'm glad you're on the ball. Excellent. I just went to study and thought, oh, okay, interesting. That, but I haven't had time to fully sort of process it. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the next one then. So the next one I have is I'd be interested to question the data you gave out about increasing incidence of autism. In fact, I think it was me that talked about it, but you've just mentioned it as well. And her question goes on to say, it has increased public awareness and hence increased diagnosis. She gives the example that post-traumatic stress disorder didn't exist before the First World War. People still suffered for it, but now, of course, we can label it. So I guess the question is more about, is the autism incidence increasing because of improved diagnostic methods or because of an actual increase in autism?
I believe it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe there's practitioner bias. You know, if you start looking for something, you're going to find it.
Sure.
And so we see that in these upticks of measles outbreaks and these upticks of pertussis outbreaks. I mean, when physicians are going, oh, your child has had a cough for a month, maybe we should test them for pertussis, instead of saying, oh, your child's had a cough for a month, here's your Z-Pak.
Yeah.
You know, and so I do believe there's some level of practitioner bias, but that certainly does not account for the absolute increase, the explosive increase of the incidence of autism.
Yeah.
And this is an argument that's basically used by the pro-vaccine people to say, oh, it's not increasing. We've had this level of autism and brain dysfunction, encephalopathy for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where are all the autistic adults then? Where are they? Where are all the severely affected autistic adults in the 30-year-old age group and older? There aren't any. When you're comparing to children now, when you see these explosions, you have special schools, special foods, all these other things, this entire industry built around treating kids that were brain damaged.
Yeah.
And so it's a pro-vaccine argument that's used to try to say, oh, there is no increased incidence. So you guys are, and because we absolutely know unequivocally vaccines have nothing to do with autism. So therefore it preserves the vaccine paradigm, and it negates anything that you possibly say, which goes back to a previous question about what about the parents in front of you? I mean, I've said this for decades, Matt. I would love to have at an ACIP meeting or at some sort of big medical meeting about 100 parents show up there with their severely vaccine injured kids and look those people in the eye and say, look me in the eye and call me a liar, because that's what you're doing behind the safety of your white coat sitting in some ivory tower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at those parents who have 24 care of their children, 24/7 care of their children, and can document it by video. Here's what my child looked like before and after this vaccine, and you're going to call me a liar? So this whole thing about increasing diagnosis, and now it's suddenly more there than it was before. If physicians could not diagnose hand flapping, toe tapping, toe walking, lack of eye contact, spinning, loss of speech, explosive GI issues 25 years ago, then they should have all lost their medical license.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, brilliant. All right, next one then. So I'd like to know what the mechanism other than statistical observation is that governs herd immunity. So we did talk about herd immunity last time, and we did talk about this idea of kind of ring fencing vulnerable people with people that had immunity.
Now remember, having immunity and being vaccinated are not synonyms.
Yes. Okay. So is there anything that you'd like to add to what we discussed last time, or do you think we more or less covered it?
I think we pretty much covered that the last time.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. So the next one is, can someone who is immunized still carry and spread an infection? Which I think you just answered in the previous comment. But do you want to just elaborate briefly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because there are lots of studies that we talk about in our boot camp course. And our boot camp course is an 8-week intensive course that open enrollment starts September the 26th. So if you're on our email list, you'll start getting information about that. And last year, or in our last boot camp course, which was in the spring, we had people from 17 countries that were enrolled in that. So it's a really good course, and we talk a lot about the fact of spreading infection, and that you can be vaccinated, particularly with the viral vaccines, measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, with those vaccines, and spread the infection. For sure, you can get colonized with the acellular pertussis vaccine after you've had it and spread pertussis. And this is all from peer-reviewed literature. That's another thing I just want to make a quick comment on, Matt, because I think it's important for your listeners. This isn't just Dr. Sherri Tenpenny talking off the top of her head opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't just me that's like just being anti-vaccine opinion maker. All the things that I say, I can back up from peer-reviewed medical literature. and can actually say that this is where these things come from. This isn't just you and I having a conversation about my opinion. And I really want to drill that home with people, that have I been able to synthesize all of this and to be able to communicate it in a, what I hope is a fairly simple way? Yes, but this just isn't my opinion. This is a synthesis of all this years and thousands of hours of studies that I've done.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. So next one. I'd like to know why she. Okay, this is a contentious one. I'd like to know why she thinks giving your child a vaccine is akin to rape. Her words, not mine. So.
Well, I think I said that probably in some either audio interview or some other thing, maybe years ago. But when you think about it, what is a vaccination, particularly on an infant or a small child? It's a physical assault without consent with a sharp object that injects a solution that can harm or kill you. So a physical assault with a sharp object without your consent, I guess you could call that medical rape.
Yeah, it's definitely penetration.
Yes, exactly. It's a penetration with a sharp object. It's not a penis and vagina thing. But it's certainly a medical assault that could be, in my opinion, I stand on the fact that could be called a medical rape.
Yeah, one of the things that I still feel, kind of in my heart, quite sad about is that I took my daughter. We went through the whole, debate with the family and with friends, and me reading all kinds of literature, looking at your DVDs, various things when my daughter was born, and ultimately we decided, I forget which one and for what reason, but we decided to take my daughter for one of the vaccinations. I think it was meningitis, anyway, so she had this vaccination. I remember being in the room with her, and of course she's smiling and happy and gurgling like these little babies do, and then the doctor, of course, injected her, and the look on her face, like I'd completely broken her trust. Like, what have you done to me? And then
why did you allow this to happen to me?
And then the tears that came, it was just heartbreaking. And I know that a lot of people see that as their duty, and go through that a lot more than I did with my children. But it does resonate with that discussion that you, or that analogy that you provided. It's that kind of breaking of trust, I think. Anyway, that was my personal experience. But anyway, I think we should.
And no, I think that's important, worth talking about here for just a minute.
Okay.
Because I actually went to a conference, this was several years ago, where there was a rabbi that was actually talking about that, and exactly what you said about, your child, when they're born, are totally dependent on you to protect them and to feed them and nurture them. And when you allow them to be injected with a substance that stings and burns and could kill them, the look on their face really is, why did you allow this to happen to me? Why did you? And when you think about I don't know what happens in the UK, but I know in the US they get 3 or 4 or 5 vaccines on the same day. And when you take that child and put them away from your mother or father's arms, and you lay them in a vulnerable position on this table, and they're held down, their arms and legs are held down by the nurse so that they can be skewered with a needle and injected with stuff that burns, stings, and probably makes them nauseated and gives them a horrible headache, and why they scream for days. And the look when they look back at you, that look in their eye of like, why did you allow this to happen to me? Should be burned into your heart forever.
Yeah.
Because it is a medical assault. It's absolutely a medical assault. And this rabbi that I heard talking about it said that he actually felt that it created it was the beginning of this whole thing that happens down the road of parents of a change in the bonding experience between parents and their children.
Yeah, I could see that in terms of it affecting attachment and so on. But I guess from the parental perspective, that the parents putting themselves through that same pain that I put myself through, because they believe in the longer term they're doing the right thing, don't they? And I know that's what your whole crusade is about, is to really question that and provide evidence as to whether or not they are doing the right thing by by vaccinating.
Well, because at the end of the day, and as your audience should understand, what are you trying to prevent? What are you seriously trying to prevent with each one of these vaccines? What does measles really look like? And mumps, and rubella, and pertussis, and ear infections from Prevnar and Hib. What are you really trying to prevent? And is there other ways that you could keep your child healthy to prevent a fever, a cough, and a rash, as opposed to injecting them with a solution that can cause a lifetime of chronic illness?
Yeah. Well, okay, I think we'll move on to the next one. And another slightly perhaps flippant one, but it says, a simple argument is, if vaccination is wrong, does that make smallpox right?
You know, it's almost like not even worth answering that, because it's so flippant. And it's obviously somebody who, see, this is where I take issue with pro-vaccine arguments, is because the only thing that they have left to stand on is name calling, insults, and stupid questions like this. And so, you know, quite frankly, you know, vaccination, if you look at all of the graphs for smallpox, polio, pertussis, measles, and you see that the incidence of those infections, or the incidence of the death rate from those infections, had almost gone completely away before the vaccine was even introduced. And yet we attribute that to the vaccination. If you understood that, you wouldn't ask a question like that.
Yeah. In the preface to the first episode, what I did was I talked about my experience of looking up, the standard vaccination literature, and how it's very impressive and very persuasive, and it really looks like a kind of medical miracle. And then I looked at the anti-vaccination literature, and I found that actually that data was even more impressive and more seemingly evidence-based, and really kind of countered very effectively all of the apparent miracles of vaccination. And then, in a kind of intuitive sense, I should be more complete with my reading around the subject. I thought, well, I need to look to see if there's any anti-vaccination literature, and so I looked up essentially what would now be called skeptics sites. They were attacking people like yourself, like Dr. McCullough, Lynn McTaggart, Vera Schreibner. And all that I found was character assassinations. I found nothing of any real scientific substance, and that was the trend that I found in general. You know, which really kind of, there goes the timer. Yeah. But you know, I think that says quite a lot about the situation.
It's really true. I mean, we have won on the science argument, hand down. They won't even discuss it anymore. We talked about that in the last interview, about how we tried to set up these very legitimate, very well-controlled, very structured debates, and the pro-vaccine people just won't even show up at the table.
Yeah.
They won't even show up. They won't even come there. And to me, if you're so convicted that you are so right, wouldn't you just love the opportunity publicly to take somebody like Sherri Tenpenny and Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy and Tony Bark and Bob Sears and all of us that know the science on our side? Wouldn't you just love the opportunity to publicly put your boot on the heel of their neck and crush them once and for all?
Absolutely.
But instead, because you have nothing to stand on, and we blow holes in every single argument you have, you won't even show up at the debate table.
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually going to ask you that question near the end. I might still ask you, it in a slightly different way, but yeah, that speaks volumes. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question. Next question is, I'd like to ask what Sherri's views are on vaccinating healthcare workers with such vaccines as hepatitis B and C, as well as BCG, tetanus, polio, rubella, and the flu vaccine. And this lady I know is a nurse.
Well, I think it's ridiculous. Right. I mean, how does me getting a shot, me getting any one of those vaccines you just listed, how does me getting that vaccine keep you from getting sick?
Yeah. Well,
and how is it going to keep me from getting sick and spreading it to you when I'm not exposed to it in the first place?
Right. I guess it's really based on that idea that there's the nasty germs out there, and the vaccine gets rid of those for the healthcare worker, and therefore the person that's the patient in the hospital doesn't get exposed. but I think you've already elaborated on that in the first episode as to why that's not really an accurate portrayal.
Right.
Yeah. With your, was it the peach discussion? Was it a peach or a nectarine or something?
Yes.
Plum.
Well, it was a bit of peach. We were talking about we were talking about the terrain and the health of the terrain. And I know there's a big, I don't know if all the healthcare workers in the UK have to get all those vaccines. Here in the US, they just push the flu shot.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And, I have a lot of nurse friends who will say it's just, if you don't get the flu shot, you have to wear like a mask all winter long, which I believe is a violation of your healthcare privacy rights and, what your healthcare decision is. And they laugh in a negative way of saying, I don't get a flu shot. I am healthy all winter long. I'm never sick. I wash my hands in between patients. I am never sick. All of my coworkers that got flu shots all winter long, they're coughing, hacking, blowing their nose, clearing their throats, all this stuff, but they don't have to wear a mask. Only I have to wear a mask, and I'm perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. We believe that if you get this shot, it's supposed to keep you from getting sick and keep you from spreading things. But if you got the shot and you're coughing, hacking, sneezing, blowing your nose, all this stuff all winter long, what is the risk of you contaminating your patient with something?
Yeah, very high. So
very high. Exactly.
Yeah. So the I guess what perhaps she's alluding to is the idea that these people are immunocompromised, and so we should do everything we can to minimize the chance of us going in with a potentially infectious situation.
But here's the thing: we get our knickers in a knot over the 17 or so pathogens for which we have vaccines. What about the hundreds of other viruses, rotaviruses, the norvoviruses, the diarrhea viruses that end up on cruise ships? What about all of the other types of bacteria like MRSA and Group B strep and all these other types of pathogens for which we have no vaccines? We don't talk about those and spreading those to our immunocompromised patients. We don't talk about the possibility of that.
Yeah.
So if we're worried about spreading pathogens to immunocompromised patients, we should be worried about spreading all of them, not just the ones we have shots for, which goes back to the terrain issue, goes back to perhaps everybody should wear a mask, whether they're vaccinated or not. All the people should wear gloves. All the people should be concerned about all the other potential pathogens they might be sharing or spreading to an immunocompromised patient. We get all focused on this short set of pathogens for which we have a vaccine.
Right. Okay. All right. Moving on. So this one is perhaps a very big question. It says, I'd love to know if there's a difference between US and UK vaccines. So it could be a huge question, or it could be a very, very brief one, I guess. It could be a yes.
Well, we kind of covered that earlier in our talk here when we talked about rotavirus, right? When we talked about that, I don't understand, and it's always been a question to me about why there are vaccines that are approved for use, like the 6-in-1s and the 7-in-1s and various different versions of the flu shot that are approved for use in the UK or all of Europe or in Asia or in other places that the FDA refuses to approve here. And I know that between, similar types of vaccines that are approved here, like we just talked about Rotatech and Rotarix, those are two vaccines approved for use in the US. And between the two of those vaccines, they have different ingredients. So are those vaccines different than the ones that are approved for use in the US? I would suspect probably so. The ingredient list is going to be different, and I don't understand the approval process. If it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. So next one, are there any vaccines that you'd recommend we'd have administered when referring to travel to various countries? So I guess this is thinking about if you're going somewhere where there's, I don't know, I was going to say malaria, but I'm not sure if...
there's no malaria vaccine.
I was going to say I'm not sure if there's a malaria vaccine, but when that there's let's say high risk of certain infectious diseases in certain areas.
But are there?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
And that's the question. Okay. Which goes back to something you just alluded to. It's about the terrain, right? So if you go to the Congo, and you're completely healthy, why would you contaminate yourself with all these vaccines and all those toxic ingredients and make yourself, suppress your immune system and potentially make yourself sick before you go there? Why do we believe that? Because there's a third world country there, that there's this swarm, just a swarm, like a swarm of bees or something of pathogens that are ready to just jump on you and attack you and are going to like make you so sick. But only for that short list of vaccines for which or short list of pathogens for which we have a vaccine.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's crazy making. And I know that in the U.S., travel to foreign countries, and you look at the CDC's website on travel, it's actually quite good. And they always recommend every single vaccine because that's what they do. And in almost every country of the world, vaccines are only recommended, not required, with the sole exception of yellow fever in a short list of countries, and mostly in around the equator in both South America and Africa. And even some of those countries don't only require yellow fever if you're traveling between those countries. But if you're coming from like the UK or the EU, or you're coming from the US or Canada or Australia, it's not required if you're not coming from a country that has yellow fever endemically. So it's only yellow fever. And so all the rest of them, it's like crazy making. I testified in court for a college professor that got a hepatitis A vaccine before going to Punta Cana. Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic in the U.S. is kind of like going to Miami. I mean, it's just a commercial, and was chronically disabled for the rest of his life on a vaccine that he really didn't need.
Right.
And so, what's important when you go to third world countries, I mean, Matt, I have been blessed in my life to have been, by the end of this year, I will have traveled through 68 countries. And I have never had a travel vaccine, nor would I. And if there was a vaccine that was required to go to a particular place, I would not go there. Because I believe that the risk of the vaccine, and you're only going to be there for a couple weeks on vacation, and even if you're going to be there for several months on a job assignment or something, you get used to the viruses and the bacteria that are there. Right. Just because they're there doesn't mean they're going to jump on you and make you sick. So travel. So it's all about washing. If you go to foreign countries, the CDC's website on travel is actually really quite good. They talk to you about mosquito protection and water protection, and perhaps if you're going into really rural areas, you might want to take iodine tablets with you and purify your water with iodine before you boil it and drink it. Only eat things that you can peel, not wash with water. When you go places, don't drink drinks with ice cubes because you don't know where that water came from for the ice cubes. It gives really, really, really good recommendations for traveling to third world countries. So if that applies to the long list of bacteria and pathogens and all these other things for which we have no vaccines, the same rules apply for measles, mumps, rubella, and chickenpox.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good stuff. So number 15, what are your thoughts about the new vaccine for boys, PHV? I don't know what that stands for.
I think that's supposed to be HPV.
That's what I was thinking. Is it HPV? Okay. And with that, so same as what we discussed earlier, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's there in the original Gardasil had it was a vaccine against 4 different viruses, 2 for cervical cancer and 2 for venereal warts. They decided to give Gardasil HPV to boys to prevent venereal warts in 9-year-olds.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
So boys aren't going to. It has no sense, and there still is. The same risk of vaccine injury and death. And there are, I think in the US, there have been 18 reported deaths for boys and 400 and some for girls from this vaccine.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Now, this one is state specific, and it was talking about laws around the states that allow religious and medical exemptions. And in particular, this person's interested in Illinois. Can the courts or a judge rule against a medical exemption when Illinois allows for both? What are my rights? And if they do rule against it, who above the judge can I go to if necessary?
That's a really, really good question, because Illinois does have a religious and a religious and a medical exemption.
Right.
So this person is actually talking about perhaps a divorce case.
Yeah.
And that's another whole long topic I won't be able to cover in 3 minutes.
Sure, sure.
But can the judge rule against your rights? Yes, they can.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a higher body to appeal to? I don't think that there is. And if you're in the middle of a divorce case, you do not want this issue to go in front of a judge. You need to hire an arbitrator. You need to hire whatever it is to get these decisions made outside of the courtroom, because the judge will always, always, always default to the CDC's rules, because that's public health, popularly held opinion, and they are not going to establish new case law. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
So the place to get these things decided, if you're in the middle of a court case battle, is in a conference room somewhere with your lawyer, your spouse's lawyer, and perhaps even an arbitrator. Just because it really comes down to power, money in terms of child support, and the two adults acting like children, fighting with each other because they're angry, and putting their child's long-term health in the middle as a football.
Yeah. Well, look, I might jump to one of the latter questions, because I think it probably ties in very much with what we're talking about here. And this has got a big story behind it. So I'm not going to start the timer yet. Okay. So I'm going to read the story first and then see what you've got to say about it. So this is from a colleague of mine in the US. And she said, my daughter's liver went into acute failure 6 months after her father took her to get caught up on vaccines. I had stopped vaccinating her after she had a horrific reaction to them at 6 months of age. And she puts in brackets HEP, MMR, DTaP, flu vaccine, and the new swine flu vaccine in one sitting. So that's what she obviously had the horrific reaction to. So she developed a large swollen belly, stopped nursing and thriving. And she actually sent me a picture of this. It's quite incredible, the swelling of the stomach. We both ended up with swine flu. She was put on a respirator. I began my research in vaccines at that time and refused to get them. Her doctor threatened to report me to the CDC, which drove me further into investigating this and changing pediatricians and living a more paleo type of lifestyle. Between ages 2 to 8 years of age, she was never sick and never saw a doctor, never needed medication or antibiotics. Though her father never agreed with my decisions on this, he left child raising issues up to me. We divorced when she was 7, and in our decree, it states all medical decisions must be made 50-50. We must agree or make decisions together and with full parental knowledge. 3 weeks after he took her to be fully updated on vaccines, 6 years worth in one visit, she was in hospital and I found out what he'd done without my knowledge. She began having terrible ear infections, stomach swelled, couldn't eat. 6 months later, her liver failed. She was hospitalized for 2 months, diagnosed with type 2 autoimmune hepatitis, and now has to take immunosuppressants. She's doing well, but it's shown chronic effects that she'll live with for the rest of her life. So the question is, how can I advocate better for her when her father doesn't believe or agree vaccines are the problem? Is there a way to prove this and really step up for her? I feel trapped in all the circumstances and don't know what else to do. And there is another paragraph beyond that, but let's stop there. So she says, how can I advocate better for her when her father doesn't believe? Is it the same thing going for arbitration?
It would be the same thing going for arbitration. The other thing would be, this is where why I say that people need to get this settled ahead of time. And generally what I suggest that people do is to come to an agreement. I mean, if the pro-vaccinating parent is so absolutely adamant that this child needs to have these shots, say, okay, here's the deal. If that child has any sort of medical issue after the fact, even a cold, a sore arm, all the way up to this long litany of horrific sort of side effects and complications that have happened from these vaccines. And I hope everybody listening to this really heard what she had to say. So they got 5 or 6 vaccines on the same day. Why does that have to happen? You know, if you really want to vaccinate, please just do one at a time, because if there's a reaction, you know what it caused from, and you won't have another one of that same vaccine. So and when in the environment, in nature, are you going to be exposed to all those pathogens on the same day? And then instead of avoiding those infections, you end up with a lifetime of chronic illness. So vaccines don't protect you from getting sick, but they can cause a lifetime of illness. So what I always say to parents is, like, when this arbitration, and sit down with the lawyers and say, okay, if you are willing to put our child at risk of these vaccines, then here's what I'll agree to. You take them to get vaccinated, but every single dime of every single medical bill that comes forward as long as this child is, until they're 22 years of age and off your health insurance, 100% of that money comes out of your pocket. You pay all the deductibles. You take her to all the office visits. You sit with her in the hospital. You are going to be responsible for that. And if we don't vaccinate and she gets sick and something happens, I'll take on 100% of the bills.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can tell you that I have quite a few cases of people that have done that. And they actually, because, the smugness of the pro-vaccinating person is like, yeah, no problem. No problem. I'll do that because I think that in the best interest of this child is to get all these shots. No problem. And nothing will happen because they're safe and effective. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So number one, that's a good way to put them against the wall. The second thing is if there's any niggly doubt in the back of their mind at all that, maybe this child might get sick and it might cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, then it might be enough to smack them upside the head and reevaluate what they're talking about. Because as it said, it comes down to power, control, and money.
Yeah. I mean, she goes on to say that she's provided him with all the research. He dismisses it. I've offered a compromise of spacing them out one per year if he'd agree to follow my detox plans, but he refuses. If I pressure him or try to bring lawyers into it, he uses his power and wealth to drag it out until I'm broke and have to drop it. This has happened twice. I've lost over 80K both times and had to hire an attorney, but he just gets a more expensive, more brutal attorney and drags it out knowing I can't afford to continue. I feel the only way to advocate more strongly is to have some proof, i.e. tests, a doctor's reports that says she can't have vaccines or something that proves her body can't handle this. But I guess
Lee, you can't look at the status of her health and say that?
Yeah, I know.
On autoimmune hepatitis that she's on immunosuppressive drugs and some physician would dare to even inject her with a vaccine? That should be malpractice.
Should be, shouldn't it? It's a tough one though, very tough. I guess the reality of what she's facing versus what to your way of thinking and my way of thinking, her way of thinking, there's obviously a mismatch there. So yes.
Well, obviously, this whole issue goes back to what I said at the beginning of this little discussion. This whole thing going on between her and her ex-husband has really nothing to do with the child.
Yeah,
he's punishing her because it's making her be sad and have anxious and anxiety and being worried and every other adjective that you can put along with that. He's punishing the mother. And he doesn't really give two pardon my French, two rats' asses about the daughter. He doesn't. This has nothing to do with the health of the child, nothing to do with trying to keep her from contracting those infections. It's all about punishing, torturing, making that mother just driving her crazy.
Yeah.
So this is two adults acting like children at the expense of this child. And this is just not. This isn't a unique case, Matt. This happens all the time.
Yeah, I bet you see this a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. How big are the risks for complications if you get infected with measles, and how can you protect yourself from the complications?
Well, the complications are basically negligible. It happens so rarely, it almost doesn't happen. I mean, when in the U.S., when they were pushing all these mandatory laws and they were saying the death rate for measles was 1 in 1,000, what that really meant is out of 4 million people who contract measles on a more global basis, there may be 1,000 of them that are actually sick enough to go to the doctor or go to the hospital. And of that 1,000, perhaps one would die. So do the math on that. And so the complication, so this is again, like what we were talking about earlier about practitioner bias. I mean, if you see a fever and a cough and a rash, would you have historically tested the child for measles? You'd have said, no, it's just a virus. It'll get better in a couple of days. Now, where children end up with having measles complication is in third world countries where they are vitamin A depleted. So what the World Health Organization used to do was they used to do a vitamin A campaign that they would go through a community or a village and they would give doses of vitamin A, like 5,000 IUs of vitamin A, 2 to 3 days before they would give them a measles vaccine. And that would greatly decrease the incidence of reactions and side effects. So how can you protect yourself from complications? Good nutrition, wash your hands, make sure you have adequate vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K.
Right. Brilliant. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay. Next question. I think it should be almost a one-word answer or one URL answer, which is a good, reliable, concentrated source of information about vaccines. What would you recommend?
Well, there's two places. One, I would go to tenpennyresearchlibrary.com.
Yeah.
Tenpenny, TENPENNY, which is my last name. Tenpennyresearchlibrary.com. Register. It's free. Register, and then you get a confirmation email that you must click on. And we have more than 10,000 articles accumulated over the last eight years showing problems associated with vaccines. You can sort it by vaccine, by category, by adjuvant. You can sort it and find what you're looking for. The second reliable source that I would recommend is Neil Miller's book. If you want a book, it's called The 400 Studies.
Okay.
And he has accumulated 400 studies that are sort of like a 400 study subset out of our 10,000 studies showing problems associated with vaccination. And the third book I would say would be Dr. Suzanne Humphrey's books, Dissolving Illusions. And if you really want a historical backdrop on smallpox, polio, measles, and it's a big, thick book. It's kind of hard to read. I use it more for a reference. That would be a book that you should have in terms of a reliable source of information, because like everything I do that's footnoted and referenced with an article from a peer-reviewed journal, Suzanne does the same thing. And Neil Miller has 400 articles from peer-reviewed literature compiled into his one book.
Okay, excellent. That's great. Fantastic. Okay, good. That was the timer going off as well. So, next one. If someone chooses to vaccinate, are there any safety measures that you would take to reduce the risk, such as the age of vaccinating at a certain age, separation between vaccines, any must-not vaccines, supplements you've just mentioned, but would there be, supplements you take if someone's being vaccinated? Let's start with those. So, what would you recommend if someone has a situation where they're going to vaccinate, they've made that decision?
Well, let's just go through each one of these individually, okay? So, the first question is, but like the age. Well, I would say no vaccines at birth and wait as long as you possibly can. I used to say wait until at least 2 years of age to start, which I think is, it's better. It's not guaranteed, because vaccines can injure adults too. So just because you're older doesn't make it it doesn't make it safe. It can make it a little safer, because you don't want to be injecting aluminum and polysorbate 80 and formaldehyde and all these other things into a neurologically developing infant that is just days old. So wait until, I would say, at least 1 year of age, preferably 2 years of age, before you start any of them. Separating the vaccines, I think, is always a good thing. Now, you can't get, at least in the U.S., you cannot get single antigen measles, mumps, rubella. Right. They separate. You can get tetanus separated from pertussis, but there's not an isolated diphtheria vaccine. But for sure, you want to give like MMR separate from everything else, and chickenpox separated from everything else, and et cetera. So giving one at a time, and then therefore, if there's any reaction, even if the reaction is a hugely swollen arm or hives or eczema, at least you know where it came from. If you get 4 or 5 vaccines, how do you know which antigen caused the problem?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And is there a duration that you'd say is sensible? A week, a month, a year?
At least a month.
Right.
Well, at least a bare minimum would be 2 weeks. If you can do it a month, that's better.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right.
I don't know what must not by any chance. I don't know what that means.
I guess that's saying, are there any that you must not take those, for any reason?
Like all of them?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think hepatitis B is the most worthless one ever. We are in our course, if you go to VaccineU and you take our hepatitis B course on newborns, you'll understand why.
Okay, so the next one is any supplements that you would recommend if someone is taking vaccination course?
Yes, I think that it's really important to have an adequate vitamin D level. D is in dog.
Hmm.
And we recommend a vitamin D
Yeah.
level somewhere between 80 and 100. I think it's really important to have adequate vitamin C on board because vitamin
Hmm.
C helps to stimulate and boost up your macrophages. And I think it's
Hmm.
one thing that I've started testing for a lot in kids is an iodine level, because iodine is very protective to the brain, and you want to have
Right.
adequate iodine levels on board. So vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin iodine, or iodine, are all things that I believe that can help, and vitamin A. 5,000
Hmm.
I use the vitamin A, like, and all of those vitamins, if you're not taking them chronically, I would say at a bare minimum 3 days before you get the shots, the day after, and 3 days before, the
Hmm.
day of, and 3 days after.
Right. Right. Okay. Excellent. That's really useful to know. Um, Post-vaccination actions in case someone took the vaccine. I don't know what that means really. I guess what they're alluding to is if there's some kind of reaction, is there anything you can do as first aid? But
Well, one of the things that I want to go back to on the must nots is that you
mm,
must not give your child Tylenol before you take them in, and you guys call it something else.
yeah, paracetamol.
Yeah, you must not do that, because
Mm,
that decreases your body's ability to make glutathione.
mm,
And
mm.
glutathione is your body's major antioxidant, and it's one of the most protective molecules in your body. And so,
Yeah,
if you've suddenly given a Tylenol or the paracetamol, am I saying that right?
paracetamol.
Yes,
Yeah.
to block your body's ability to protect itself, then
Mm.
I do believe that increases your risk of side effects and reactions. So
Right.
that's a must not.
Yeah.
Post vaccination, don't give Tylenol or the other one after it either.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
do it
Okay.
for the same
Okay.
reasons. Okay, don't do that. I've had some people say that they put like ice packs on the vaccination area. They've used like cod liver oil packs just to kind of keep down the inflammation and to
Hmm.
keep it from spreading through different areas of the body so quickly. I don't know if
Yeah.
that helps or not, but I do know that
Hmm.
that's something that people have done.
Okay. Okay. Good. And that certainly seems to answer the next point there, which was preventing symptoms or handling symptoms after
Yeah,
the vaccine. Yeah.
I think so.
Good. Good. Okay. So how about this Corvelva Institute? Have you ever heard of that? So the question here is, I'd love for Sherri to comment on the Corvelva Institute investigations into vaccines. Have you heard of them?
Yeah, Corvelva is a laboratory that's
Right.
located in Italy. And what
Right.
Corvelva has done is taken individual vaccines and has examined them and found an amazing amount of stuff that's in there that's not on the label. And they've actually found that, like vaccine antigens, when they looked at Infinrix hexa, which I know that in Europe that's one of the first vaccines that's, I think, a 6-in-1 or 7-in-1 vaccine
Mm,
that children get as their first shot.
mm,
It has DPT, hepatitis B, polio, and I believe Hib inside
mm.
of it. What they found was there was no antigens for diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, only one of the three polio antigens, and I think no hepatitis B. So
Yeah.
parents who think that they're giving a shot to protect their child from these infections are getting all risk and no
Mm,
benefit, because the
mm,
antigens aren't there, and they found a long list of abnormal chemicals and things and metals and compounds that they couldn't even identify. In fact,
mm.
I've written a couple of articles on that. If people is that to go into greater detail, if you go to Vaxxter.com, VAXXTER, Vaxxter.com, and at
Mm.
the top where it says Dr. Tenpenny's blog, you can
Right.
find it there, or you can put down in the search, you can put in Corvelva in the search, and you can read all of the details with all the links that I did. And that's at Vaxxter, VAXXTER.com. That's one of my websites where you can find where I've written blogs about that particular topic.
Perfect. Perfect. That's great. Thank you. Okay. So next one. In today's world, if we were not to vaccinate our children, obviously they would get certain infections from vaccinated children. Is a shedding infection the same as the real thing? Would we be immunized from the real infection? Now, again, I think you've covered that already today and last time, but is there anything you want to add to what we've discussed already?
Well, that's a really, really good question, and I'm
Mm,
not 100% sure, because if you're around a child that's been vaccinated for chickenpox, and
mm,
that chickenpox virus is attenuated, so it's really not the same thing as a virus, a wild type virus. But you contract a vaccine strain infection. Is that the same type of infection as a wild type virus infection? And I would say, based on polio data, it's not. The virus that's in the vaccine is not the same virus or bacteria that's out in the environment. So, and when you talk to immunologists, they say, I remember years ago, I had a student, an MD, PhD student in my office for 3 weeks. And I thought, and her PhD was in immunology. And we had some great conversations about vaccination. And she said, I think the whole thing is just a scam. She said, because how can you inject a virus that is not the same as what you find out in the environment, an attenuated, weakened, genetically modified particle into the body, create a reaction from it, and expect that to protect you from something that's out in the environment? She said, from an immunological perspective, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was a gal that had a PhD in immunology.
Right. Okay. That's good. Well, it's not good. It's scary.
Yeah.
Okay. If by not vaccinating the child and her immune system is strong from good nutrition and lifestyle factors, if they miss these infectious agents, is there concern for if they get them later in life?
They probably won't get them later in life because there's so little circulating measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, pertussis things now. And if you get pertussis later in life, it's just a chronic cough. The only time pertussis is a serious infection is in infants under 3 months of age. That's it.
Right.
And so there was always this thing that if you got chickenpox or measles later in life, you could have a more serious type of reaction. I think theoretically that's true, but because there is such little virus out there circulating right now, I think that's more of a theoretical concern than a real one.
Okay, good. And I think a related sort of second part to that question is there an age correlation to these infections, as in, should we be exposing ourselves to these for epigenetic reasons? I'm trying to think what they're actually alluding to. I mean, obviously, I think they're saying is that, because you used the phrase a few times, that you experienced the age-appropriate infections.
Right.
And I guess they're saying, if we have them at the appropriate time, does that then alter our genetic expression through epigenetic mechanisms?
I don't think so. I don't think that has anything to do with epigenetics at all.
No.
It is if you have age appropriate infections in the presence of fever, then you develop a long-term lifetime immunity of the way that it was supposed to be. And I really don't think that has anything, in my opinion, anything to do with epigenetic expression.
Okay, fine. What would your ideal world look like if it was a vaccine-free world? How would the world look?
So much healthier. So much healthier. In one generation, we would have a healthy generation of children. We wouldn't be seeing all these children with neurological problems, autoimmune diseases, and cancer. We would have some children that would have problems with an infection, and there would be a few children that would die. There's no doubt. But put that in perspective with the lifetime chronic illnesses, like that one case study that you just read of this little girl that now has autoimmune hepatitis and will be on immunosuppressive drugs for her life. Take that times millions of children around the world. We would have such a healthier society. We'd had healthier, I have a tagline on one of my email addresses, Matt, that says vaccination, a 200-year mistake.
Right.
And that if we stopped injecting foreign matter into little children and allowed them to grow, it would be so much better. And I do think that we need to expand that a little bit. What would a vaccine-free world live? We need to have a GMO-free world. We need to have a pesticide-free world. We need to take, all these things that have contaminated our food supply, our water supply, and our air. That was so that we could have, we could live in a state of prosperity and health. And if we got sick, we could use food as our medicine and clean water as our medicine to get better. And so I think that a vaccine-free world, the whole world would be better off. The whole world would be better off. And then if we went the next step and got rid of pesticides, we would also be better off.
Yeah. Okay. So this one's slight change in tack. It's that this person would like to know more about the safety of vaccination for dogs or pets in general. My vet was telling me that I might have been right that animals are born with immunity if they were with their mum for some time, but some dogs are separated from their mums way too early, and their immunity can't support them fighting the infections.
Well, first of all, I don't know a great detail about animal vaccines other than what my own, just a little bit because I have a dog. But I do go to a holistic vet who stopped being a regular vet because she could no longer vaccinate and see what was happening to these animals. She just couldn't do it.
Right.
And she said that she really feels that if with the rabies vaccine, the only time she's ever seen a pet react to it is let me rephrase that. The times that animals do not react is if you request a mercury-free rabies vaccine for your animal, and they do exist, and they're not any more expensive. She said the rabies they're equally as inexpensive as a rabies vaccine loaded with mercury.
So that's a good tip.
And I also know that, I think that that's a really important thing. And I do believe that, pets are just like little people, right? They're supposed to be, they're born, they're nursing, they get to the place where they wean, they got their own immune system. Why do we need to contaminate them with foreign matter?
Yeah.
Because they've got a healthy terrain and they're not going to get sick.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's a question which you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but it's kind of quite a contentious one, and it's about your personal beliefs around various things, from gun control to abortion to same-sex marriage, etc., etc. And I think this is someone trying to press your buttons. So what do you want to do on that question? Do you want to go into those things?
Well, I would respond to that by saying that my personal beliefs have nothing to do with my message that vaccines are not safe. They don't keep you from getting sick, and they can definitely cause long-term disease and harm. I mean, this is like a troll type question wanting to do some sort of a character assassination on me.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter if I'm pro-liberal or anti-liberal, if I'm pro-abortion or pro-life. It doesn't matter if I'm pro-Trump or anti-Trump. It doesn't change the quality or the consistency of my message. And so what my belief systems have nothing to do with all of the years that I've studied, all the years of science, all the peer-reviewed literature that I've been talking about. It's not about me, and it's not about my opinions and the facts that vaccines aren't safe, protective, or that they can cause harm. And if I make a statement on any one of these things, then I'm actually alienating 50% of your listenership. If I say I'm pro-Trump, oh, well, that's why she's against vaccines. If I say I'm anti-Trump, oh, then that means she's pro-Antifa. And she's No, all of those things are absolutely irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant to what we're talking about with vaccination and what you should consider investigating in regards to your health and the health of your children.
Yeah. Well, I had sort of noted to myself that does the fact that people want to know about your beliefs around abortion, as an example, say more about you or about the person who wants to know?
Well, exactly, because it gives people, let's say, just for the sake of discussion, that I say I am pro-life and anti-abortion. Well, now everybody's like, they can focus on that and negate everything else that I say and not hear a word I say about vaccination. And I'm not saying I'm any one of these things in one direction or another in terms of this list. I mean, this list that you sent me, and I think we should read it. It said, are you anti-gun control, anti-liberal? Are you anti-abortion? Are you anti-same-sex marriage? Are you anti-marijuana? Are you pro-Trump? Interesting how that changed there. Anti-mandatory seat belts, anti-vaccine. I mean, all of these questions are irrelevant to the discussion about vaccine safety, efficacy, side effects, long-term side effects, complications, what's coming through the vaccine, all the things that we talk about in our boot camp course, which open enrollment will be September 26th, talking about all the courses, the advanced courses inside of VaccineU, all the things that we talk about on Facebook, all of the studies inside of tenpennyresearchlibrary.com is irrelevant. These questions are absolutely irrelevant and have no bearing whatsoever on that body of information.
Yeah. Okay, good. Now I had another question come in about autoimmunity. Autoimmunity. I had another question come in about how vaccines interfere with and disrupt the microbiome. Could it be through the mitochondria, and will it affect them for life? Such as, if you had the German measles vaccine, could that then disrupt your microbiome for life? I think is the question. Have you seen any studies around vaccination and the microbiome specifically?
Not specifically, but once you go drill down and you look at some of the ingredients, it makes sense. Yeah. Like, for example, the MMR vaccine has 2 ingredients in it that I believe are the main reason why the MMR vaccine, and particularly the measles fraction, is so toxic to children. It was the second largest concentration of gelatin, and there's a strong relationship between systemic allergic reactions and anaphylaxis, and gelatin can cross react with certain types of foods. And the MMR vaccine has 14,500 micrograms of gelatin. In addition to that, the MMR vaccine has 25 milligrams, so 25,000 micrograms of neomycin.
Right.
And there are 7 other vaccines. Actually, that's correct. There's 17 other vaccines that have various antibiotics in them. But the antibiotics in the other vaccines are listed in picograms and nanograms. The neomycin in the MMR is 25 milligrams.
Wow.
And I've gotten, you'll laugh at me, Matt, on this, is that because of doing all this work, as an American, I've gotten better at the metric system.
Yeah.
Because we don't use the metric system here, so I've got better at it, right?
That's right. We still call them quarter pounders.
Yes, exactly. So think about that. The MMR vaccine with 25,000 micrograms of neomycin, which kills off all the bacteria. It's a very strong antibiotic. It actually can have nephrotoxic or kidney types of side effects if you're using it IV. So you have neomycin and all this gelatin that goes in and causes all this disruption in the gut, which kind of goes back to some of the things that Andy Wakefield found in his original 23-year-old paper now that everyone drags out and parades around like it's new science or something, is when he did the colonoscopies on these children, and he found ileolymphoid hyperplasia, which means the lymph nodes inside of the GI tract were all swollen and inflamed. Could that inflammation have come from the neomycin and the gelatin that was in the vaccine? And oh, by the way, the virus just happened to be there because nobody was actually looking for a reaction to gelatin and neomycin.
Right.
And could that have been what caused these kids to have all this horrible abdominal pain and the gut microbiome being destroyed? And does that last for life? I don't know. I mean, what about people with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and horrible irritable bowel? I mean, sometimes you can get those people better and sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
And so in terms of lifetime disruption of the gut microbiome, maybe, at least in a subset of patients, I would say yes. In others, I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think that pretty much rounds off all the questions. One thing that I put in my show notes for the first episode was a quote direct from the World Health Organization's website, which is talking about these graphs that we've alluded to a couple of times. And I've got an example of one of the graphs on the show notes as well. And it's saying that diseases, in inverted commas, it's saying diseases had already begun to disappear before vaccines were introduced because of better hygiene and sanitation. And then end of the quote marks. And it says, statements like this are very common in anti-vaccine literature, the intent apparently being to suggest that vaccines are not needed. Improved socioeconomic conditions have undoubtedly had an indirect impact on disease. Better nutrition, not to mention the development of antibiotics and other treatments, have increased survival rates. But looking at the actual incidence of disease over the years can leave little doubt of the significant direct impact vaccines have had, even in modern times. And then it goes on to say, there have been periodic peaks and valleys throughout the years, but the real permanent drop in measles incidence coincided with the licensure and wide use of measles vaccine beginning in 1963. But the graph that's accompanying it shows that the incidence was practically at zero by 1963. And, so I look at that, and maybe the graph's not right. That's one possibility, but it's from, what would appear to be reputable sources. And so you're looking at the graph and going, well, how can the World Health Organization say that? And the graph says something entirely contradictory to what the WHO are saying. How does an independent researcher look at that and reconcile the two? Because they're completely disparate. I guess the answer is that someone's not telling the truth.
Well, I think that, isolated bullet points like that are difficult to prove or disprove. I think that taking a 30,000-foot view of overall health of children is that maybe the incidence of infection has dropped dramatically, but has the health of our society improved? Has the trade-off occurred? And if it has occurred, is it worth it? When you look at, we've got the most, at least in America, we've got the most unhealthy set of children like ever. And of course, some of that is food and EMF and 5G and lack of exercise, because kids are glued to their computers these days instead of out playing soccer or baseball or riding their bikes. I mean, there's never just an isolated incident. But if you look at just general overall health, and the incidence of childhood cancer, childhood diabetes starting at age 1. We never had that before, insulin-dependent diabetes. The incidence of asthma, allergies, eczema, ADD, ADHD, psychiatric things has just exploded with the explosion of the vaccine schedule in 1991, when they started introducing hepatitis B at birth and Hib at 2 months of age. And then we added chickenpox in 95, and we added Prevnar in 2000, and on and on and on. So has this, if you want to stand on their words of saying that vaccines have decreased the incidence of these infections, and we really have to stop calling them diseases. We really do. They're infections. They come and go in 7 to 10 days and leave behind immunity. And so if it really is true, vaccines have decreased the incidence of infection, which I'm not sure that that's true, but let's assume that it is.
Okay.
Has the trade-off been worth it?
Yeah.
When you see the explosion of childhood illnesses, brain inflammation, encephalopathy. I mean, you go to like a track meet these days of teenagers, or a swim meet, and you see all of the inhalers lined up against the wall, that these kids have to take a hit on their inhaler and then swim in their meet. And then as soon as they hop out, run over to their inhaler and take an inhaler, breathe again. Did we do that 15 years ago or 20 years ago or longer ago?
No,
the answer is
no. More of a rarity, isn't it? Yeah.
When you see the explosion of all of these different things that we have to do to treat these vaccine injured kids, we have to have peanuts out of the school. We have to worrying about anaphylaxis. We have to have specialized classes for OTPT speech therapy, which young parents, because all the kids are doing it, they think that's just a normal milestone.
Yeah.
So I think if you take the bigger view of, okay, let's make the assumption vaccines decrease the incidence of infection. All right. Let's assume that that's true. Has the trade-off been worth it? Yeah,
perfect. I had a question which was, if you're so confident that your anti-vax position is correct, why don't you debate with a pro-vaccination specialist? And again, I think you covered that earlier, but
it's because they don't show up.
There you go. Yeah.
Within the last year, I mean, last November, it was either November or October, we had this thing. It was it's called the One Conversation. Where these people set up, these were, me, Del Bigtree, Dr. Bob Sears, Dr. Tony Bark, Chris Shaw, who's an expert on aluminum, James Lyons-Weiler, who is a PhD researcher scientist. There were a few more of us. So I think there were 10 of us on the stage, and there were going to be 8 or 10 of pro-vaccine really strong people. These were people from Emory and Georgia Tech and research labs right there because this was in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area. And it was not going to be any gotcha stuff. Each side was given a specific set of questions. They were going to be given a specific number of minutes they could talk. That was going to be moderated by a gentleman who was a well-known radio and television host in the Atlanta area, who said that he was completely uninformed on both sides. He said, I don't get a flu shot just because my mom told me not to do it. He said, but other than that, I know nothing about vaccines one way or another. He was like in his maybe late 50s, early 60s. It was going to be telebroadcast and set up. And 3 days before the event, 100% of the people on the pro-vax side pulled out.
Wow.
We were giving them, like I said to you earlier, Matt, you know, if you were a pro-vaccine and you pro-vaccine people were so 100% sure you was right, wouldn't you just love to have an opportunity in a public forum to put the heel of your boot on the neck of Sherri Tenpenny and Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy and all the rest of us who know our science and know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And wouldn't you love to disparage them and eat them for lunch in a recorded public forum? Instead, they don't show up, and their fallback argument is, well, if we debate them, then we are giving credence to the fact there is something worthy of debate. And since we know there's nothing worth debating, we're not going to put a feather in the hat of those anti-vaccine people. The second thing happened, Bobby Kennedy did the same thing a few months later. I think this was like maybe March or April of this year. There was a state legislator in Rhode Island who wanted to hold this debate. Now, this is Bobby Kennedy, who's a lawyer, who he invited up to debate 5 PhD researcher scientists from Harvard, Yale, and Emory, or not Emory, Harvard, Yale, and several other, the big colleges, the Ivy League colleges right there in the Northeast sector. Come in, you guys are MDs, PhDs, researchers, come in and beat the crap out of this lawyer, Bobby Kennedy, who is now taking this anti-vax position. So Bobby Kennedy was flying in at 8 o'clock in the morning. The debate was supposed to be 3 hours from 9 to noon. At 3 o'clock in the morning, before the debate was supposed to happen, all 5 of them pulled out and said, we're not going to debate him because then we will say that there's something worth debating. So we have tried many, many times. This was only 2 incidents. I could report several more where similar types of things that said, bring it on. I can't tell you how many times I've put an open invitation out there to Dr. Paul Offit, who's the big pro-vaccine pundit. Come on, bring it on, baby. Come on over. Let's sit down and we'll have pre-formatted questions and you can say your stuff and I can say my stuff. And the whole idea was going to be not that I was going to convince him or he was going to convince me, but the audience would hear the answers of the same question of both sides of the equation so they could make a more intelligent, informed decision on their choices for their children. That was the point of the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. It strikes me that, you know, Jordan Peterson, who I don't know if you're aware of, but he's obviously been he's been a fairly sort of popular character on YouTube of late. Psychology professor from Harvard originally, and then now at Toronto University, and he talks about the importance of freedom of speech from the perspective that the moment you are restricted in what you're told you can or cannot say, then the thing that suffers the most is the truth, because by speaking, we get the opportunity to get closer to the truth because we put our position out there, someone else corrects our position or attempts to correct our position, and we get steered closer to the truth. But it strikes me that refusal to speak is a way of hiding the truth.
Well, absolutely. And look at all of this internet censorship that they're doing now about my position on our science about vaccines. And I can back up everything I say with peer-reviewed literature, but now we're not allowed to say it. You know, Facebook deplatforming, YouTube, Vimeo, MailChimp, all these other platforms that are saying we will have none of that. You cannot say that because it's fake news, it's false information, you're misleading the public, you're putting the public health at risk. Excuse me? Have you ever even really listened to anything I had to say? Have you ever really looked at any of this information? And now we use the mainstream media as a hammer to shut down freedom of speech and freedom of debate.
Yeah,
Freedom
yeah,
of debate.
that's really, really concerning. Look, just to finish off, the very last thing that we talked about, one of the very last things we talked about last time was I was mentioning about this paper that looked at the systematic review process and how you end up with what this guy Ioannidis established that probably only around 3% of systematic reviews are worth the paper that they're written on. And we were linking that in with the sort of pro-vaccination lobby that say, you need to use systematic reviews in order to get the very highest quality data. And I actually had sort of prefaced that in the previous episode by saying that there's something like 1.2 million research papers on vaccination. And so obviously then 3% of that takes that right down to a much lower figure, probably somewhere around 35,000 or something research papers, which, obviously means it's a much smaller body of evidence than we originally thought. But it actually struck me afterwards that that's just doing a Medline search on vaccination papers as opposed to meta-analyses or systematic reviews. So when you look at systematic reviews on vaccination, there's actually only 4,630 that are available on Medline. So you look at 3% of that number, now you're down to 138 studies, right? And I know this is just maths and
that's great math.
Playing around with numbers, but then you've got your 10,000 studies which question the safety, efficacy, benefits, etc. of vaccination, and suddenly that 138 number is is looking far weaker than what I talked about in the last episode. So I thought I'd just finish off by pointing that out, and again just to thank you so much for your time and for your all the work you've done, and the I guess your pain tolerance for sticking with it for this long. Yeah.
Well, it's important to me because I feel like it's important for the next generation of children. I mean, I have parents that come up to me that have completely unvaccinated children. I have this one woman I'll never forget was when I did that tour. Remember, I said, could you come to Tynwald Day over on the Isle of Man, right? And this woman who I've met her a couple of times, and she has said to me, she came up to me with tears in her eyes, and she said, please never stop what you're doing. I'm so concerned about who my children are going to marry. Because her kids were raised on a farm, only organic, completely unvaccinated. And she's really concerned about, she's got 2 boys. What is going to be the genetics of the girl that they marry if they were completely vaccinated?
Yeah.
And so I do this because I so believe in the fact that vaccination is a 200-year mistake, that what advanced society was clean food, clean water, sanitation, and refrigeration. When people could actually put their food in the refrigerator so it doesn't turn into maggots in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And they have better health and things like that. It's like we have a multi-generational indoctrination, and we call it the religion. It's like it's a religion. It's like if you say anything bad against vaccines, it's like suddenly you're being sacrilegious and you're swearing against against God, and you're doing something like horrible because you're saying that vaccines may cause harm. It's like sacrilegious somehow because it's a religion. Because people even use the language, Matt, of saying I believe in vaccines.
Yes, very interesting.
And it's not a belief system.
Yeah.
We're not talking about faith.
Yeah.
And when you actually dive deep and you look at things like, I really have never met anyone who's taken a legitimate deep dive into the literature that I've read over all these years and have said, yep, I get it. Vaccines are good, safe, and I'm still vaccinating my kid. Line them up. I've never met anybody that has done that, ever.
Yeah.
Who's done a real research and not just read like the Skeptics blog or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So just so that people know how to get hold of you, I know you've mentioned various sites. One thing I was going to ask you about VaccineU is, obviously you've mentioned it a few times, but who is the information really targeted to? Is it healthcare professionals or anyone with an interest? What sort of level is the information at?
Anyone with an interest. Anyone that's interested, because if you enroll in a course in VaccineU, and they range in price from $39 for an individual module. It's $59 if it's a double module, like there's twice as much information. And the problematic ingredients course, that's 7 modules. And so instead of $700 or $239, we group them all together for $199. And so but you have lifetime access. I mean, as long as our site is still on the internet, you can access it for your entire life. It's anywhere from a 30 to 50-minute video. You get a course outline, a course objectives, a quiz, and a certificate. And the most important thing that you get is access to what we call the document box. We call it the doc box for short. That will have anywhere from 4 to 20 PDF files from peer-reviewed literature that you can download and read. And those are the sources that we use to support what we are saying inside of the video. And so you can see that, this isn't just, Dr. Tenpenny's opinion. This is like, here's the literature that, and the references, and you can download all of that except the video. The videos are proprietary information that stays there, but you can download all the rest of that stuff into a manual. And yes, it's geared, and the language is all geared. It's all is towards the general public. But it could, because of the peer-reviewed literature that's there, it can go all the way up to chiropractors, MDs, DOs, whoever wants to read it. And it's actually like all right there in one place. Now, all of the literature, we didn't steal it from anybody. We didn't take it from, publish anything that wasn't available out in the general domain. But what we've done is we have tracked them down and put them into one place for your convenience.
Brilliant, brilliant. And on the note with regards to, I know you no, maybe it was almost tongue in cheek, but I guess there's a real threat that your sites could be, inhibited in some way via Google and so on. I saw something recently about Macola and how he is now actively inhibited or suppressed. His site is suppressed by Google's search feature. And I don't use Google anymore. I use Ecosia. Have you heard of them?
Have not.
They're an eco-based search engine, and the idea is that whereas Google make all their money through ads, and of course that goes into Google's pockets to help them develop, Ecosia do the same. They make money through ads, but for every 45 searches you do, they will plant a tree.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so, you can have your own forest essentially quite quickly, I expect, in your case.
Yeah, that's really good. So yes, we have built what Matt, who's my techie guy, who's my business partner, and the main place for people, it will be released today. It will be released today. So starting tomorrow, you'll be able to find everything that I talk about at courses4mastery.com. So it's courses number 4mastery.com. And when you go there, I got to get the video done on Sunday, but it'll be a little video that'll explain everything that's there about the boot camp, the membership, VaccineU, tenpennyresearchlibrary.com, Vaxter. I mean, how they're all related, because when you're just listening to this, you're going, man, she's like all over the place.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have this Courses for Mastery. It's really like a landing page that just walks you through, and you can find everything that I talk about, all the links, everything right in that one place. So you'll go to like the boot camp. If you went to the boot camp button right now, it's right in the middle of the page. You clicked on it, it would take you to a landing page that says, sorry, we're closed. Open enrollment will begin September 26th. Please enter your email to be on our list. And so all of those things will be all off of one website. It's called Courses for the number 4 mastery.com, coursesformastery.com.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes as well. But fantastic. Thank you so much again. And who knows, we may well have to dive into it deeper down the line at some point, but that's been a brilliant introduction, and hopefully we've answered all the listeners' questions so far.
Yeah, I hope that we got through a lot, and if maybe you get another load of 25 questions, you want to do another one in the future, I'm more than happy to spend time with you, Matt. It's been delightful.
Sherri. Appreciate it. Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to part 2 of the interview with Dr. Sherri Tenpenny here on FC2O. If you enjoyed that and found it useful, please do feel free to share it with your friends, colleagues and loved ones. If you'd like access to any of the courses or information presented by Sherri in the 2 episodes, and much more beyond that, please head over to coursesformastery.com. That's courses number 4, mastery.com, or to VaccineU.com. That's vaccine, capital U.com. To ensure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe at Apple Podcasts or follow us on Spotify or Stitcher. Looking forward to having you join us for the next show.